300 BC to 300 AD is a period of time that had a lot of interesting things happen. This is not actually the real timing. This is a vague, hand wave version of history. That's a period of time that all of the written versions of ancient oral traditions of what Christianity is existed first in written form. Yes, 300 years before Christ, the works that became part of Christian doctrine were being written, and 300 years after his death. And yes, it's before Christ and after death. Adadinum, blah, blah, blah. So, during this period of time, many things were happening in culture. It should be understood that there were monotheistic and polytheistic religions. Now, some would argue that polytheism just meant that there were lots of religions tolerated that were all monotheistic. That's one way of looking at it if you want to. The other way to look at it is that everyone decided that there were multiple gods, and they went out of their way to explain to everybody that these are warring, petty, vain, stupid, obnoxious gods that fight over things. I mean, literally a Marvel Universe version of gods and demons and such. And depending on what you wanted done, they were more utilitarian. For instance, Saturn was a god for, at one time or another, agriculture. That could change over time. People would change what they decided things meant. And there was an undercurrent that people understood that these weren't really gods in the traditional sense that people use in Western culture. They could kill each other. They could be resurrected. They could be impotent. They could be omnipotent and omnipotent. Really dependent on what you wish to decide. Deciding that you were going to claim to be a god or to be an emissary of God was very common. And cults were very common because a polytheistic society, a poly-religion society, and with dozens of different forms of religion was the norm in some areas. Now, in some cities or countries, you were required to acknowledge and, do as they do, whether you liked it or not, up to and including the point of being killed. They didn't wish to be offended by you. Offenses taken, not given. Neener, neener. Archaeological sites from 300 BC to 300 AD, as well as all records that we can find, people started actually writing things down a lot more than they had done before. Let's not discuss any libraries that were burned. Let's move on. I'll try to if you can. Yes, I'm still ticked about it. In Algeria, at the time, it was called Constantine, a Roman coastal province. By 300 AD, it no longer showed evidence of a cult that honored their god in a holiday as an agricultural deity, Saturn and Saturnalia. Now, the immediate response someone's going to cat-like type below when they hit caps lock and slap keys with their whatever body part they wish to, is that the cult of Saturn or Saturnalia or some other, it doesn't matter what, Mars, it doesn't matter, still exists today, and they're the enemy of all people, not just a religion that was essentially a competition with them for 600 years, from 300 BC to 300 AD, that they've never gotten over. Just like I can't get over a certain library being destroyed that could have contained forbidden secrets or just a really cool pudding recipe. These people can't get over the hype man and the propaganda for a 600-year period of time where a particular monotheistic religion, it wasn't really monotheistic if you have several gods in it, but okay, we'll call it monotheistic for fucking sake, I guess, fine. They are so jealous and so competition-based that anybody not believing their religion is the enemy. For instance, an atheist like me is the devil somehow. These are groups of people that demonize. Literally, the word demonize is almost exclusively associated with Western religions like Catholicism and Christianity and variations thereof that literally say that if you don't follow the religion, you're the devil. They literally invented a real meat space, real world version of the devil to fight. They would just say you're the enemy because you're just evil and that's it. That's called demonizing. And that included demonizing specifically gods or demigods or just, hand-waved demigods that really nobody really believed in, honestly. At least most people didn't. Like Saturn and celebrations like Saturnalia. Even to today. Now, I'm going to say this very simply to you. If your entire, I guess the word tristes is used, if your entire, end game thesis of life is that you have to shut everybody else up and tell them they're not allowed to speak or you're going to kill them, you're not afraid of the effect they have on the world or the words they have. No. You're trying to suppress evil doers. If you try to suppress a religion that doesn't fucking exist anymore, this shows a supreme lack of belief in your own beliefs. There was also, at the time, at one point or another, named something called satus. Now, that could also be oriented towards satyr, or satisfaction, or status, mispronouncing words. But at the time, the word sowing was used for a farmer's festival marking the end of autumn planting season. It was just a farmer's festival. It happened about the same time. Lots of festivals happen about the same time. Later on, it only marked the shortest day or the winter solstice because people were acutely aware of what the solstice was. And that became something, a piece of reality intruding on your hypothetical timing system where we were nailing down time. It should also be pointed out, we found out we made a giant set of mistakes on how long a year is at one point. Then the solstice turned into Brumalia, bruma, etc. By 300 AD, the celebration of Christmas and Christian religion had absorbed virtually every bit of culture in some areas, other areas no. But anyway, from 300 BC to 300 AD, it went from polytheism and people not really taking it too seriously and ignoring people who did, to being a monotheistic, authoritarian, autocratic religion running shit. Or not, depending on how you look at it. And constantly preaching that they're being persecuted by evildoers that simply refuse to bow down to their will. Now, today's status. We now have conspiracy theorists claiming Saturnalia, Saturn, anything, it doesn't matter, Mars, whatever, is a death cult. And insert that as a death cult, and they're underground tunnels, and the reason you can't prove they exist is they're really good at covering their tracks, and the only reason this person talking to you knows anything about it is they have divine sight and they can discern things. And this cult exists. And if you disagree with them, you're one of them. Sound familiar, right? Anyway, one of the many Illuminati, balloon naughty, your mom naughty, symbols, especially if it was black, became any cube or cube iteration. A square is a square, but if you stretch it, squeeze it, pop it, bop it, bop, nop, nop it, lop it, it can be a rectangle. Okay. And if you get a real three-dimensional cube, because we're only dealing with 2D and 3D items, if you rotate it, it can become a hexagon. It can be all sorts of shapes. You can rotate any three-dimensional shape you want to and get other shapes. And that's actually one of the ways to understand 3D and 4D mathematics and time space. But that's an entirely other unrelated video. But the point is, cubes became symbolic of evil. Now I'm going to point out a visual cortex problem that some of you may be aware of, especially after a head injury. I had one and I was aware of it. The human brain and your eye itself on an analog, almost visceral, on a very visceral analog level, act as preprocessors to throw out garbage. While you're watching this video, the outline in black is supposed to be black, but it isn't. It's a gray color. And even on a monitor where you could tell it, no, just define it as black, it'll still be not black. And there'll be noise in it, and you're ignoring it. When you walk around during the day, every single time you've accidentally seen a reflection off of chrome or sunlight hit your eye and it damaged your eye, your brain then has to sit there and compensate the levels for each of those dots in your eye that is damaged. Now, what happens if you get a visual cortex injury, a head injury? You see stars. Those stars are literally, in some cases, not all of them, are all of the dots in your eye that were damaged every time you accidentally saw a flash of light from an arc or a welder or the sunlight bouncing off a window and it damaged your eye permanently. You're suddenly aware of how absolutely screwed up your vision is. In my case, I had a head injury from falling backward where I, quote, saw stars and then had it explained the way I've just done to you for weeks. Also, my brain didn't process information correctly because I had brain damage to the visual cortex in my head. Now, what that meant is that I would look at letters and numbers and not be able to just have it say S, J, L, whatever letter I'm looking at. My brain wouldn't get that. I had to relearn how to read partially. Also, looking at shapes became confusing because I started noticing my eye would take its jumbled up, very low resolution data, which I was able to see for a split second, and then make it into straight lines or curves. Because your brain and your eye simplify things so it's easier to understand, so you're not hit with, this is not a joke, over 10 megabytes of data every millisecond coming at your brain. In case you didn't notice, you don't have a GX75 processor out of your computer sticking in the back of your head. To reduce literally how many calories you're burning, part of your brain just throws out a lot of data. There's a bunch of tricks like looking at a clock, moving clock, one of those clock with hands, and notice that your brain will fill in the gaps from any pattern and any discrepancy will be corrected for. You'll see the hand go backwards when it really doesn't. Your brain will play these tricks on you. But when your brain has been damaged, you see the raw data. You see the world as it is as far as your eye is concerned. And looking at any straight edge like that, going from the dark area to the light area, you start noticing all sorts of stuff, like little fiddlies over the edge of that line, because that's the noise your brain, your eye, your nervous system, your neurons are producing, and it looks creepy. And it happens on a fairly large scale. Your brain just throws out the data because it's irrelevant, and also it doesn't help you survive being attacked by a wolf. Now, the other thing, when you make a cube shape or a perfect square, if you're not aware of it, the X and Y coordinates for your eyes are not actually completely square. Yeah, I know, crazy kind of concept. In fact, you have a blind spot that's off-center. You can look this shit up, right? So what that means is that if you look at any regular thing with straight edges to it, like a cube, or any line drawing, your brain sometimes will fixate on it. Some of you have experienced this because you did psychotropic drugs, or you just took medication, or you were just sick once, and you found that you could stare at things and it was kind of weird for some reason, and you may not have even been able to grasp what you're looking at. That kind of subconscious fixation that we ignore happens when we look at shapes. And no, it's not a way to hack into your brain exactly, but some people are aware of it. Okay. Most of us are smart enough to ignore this because we start staring like a deer in headlights and get hit by a truck. That's what you want to avoid. Some people fixate on this shit. Hence, Illuminati symbol black cubes like the Kaaba, Mecca, Saudi Arabia, a black cloth shrouded little building, pretty big building actually, that's cube-like. So I'm going to list one guy below that was born in 1940. He fixated on this stuff and did a bunch of other stuff that's not relevant to this video. But he decided that that was an example of the black cube. That's his only contribution. There's also somebody in 2017, Arthur Moros, who wrote a book called The Cult of the Black Cube, a Saturnian Grimoire. That's just two of hundreds and hundreds of people who exploited this fixation people have on cubes, Saturn, etc. And again, this is a marketing campaign from 300 BC to 300 AD for a competing religion that decided to literally hunt down and kill every member of the others. Also, there's a company called Black Cube that was hired by the Trump campaign people. You might want to look into them. But it's not symbolic in anything. Oh, by the way, the black rapper named Ice Cube has nothing to do with this. Don't look him up. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck.